Today we are going to be learning how to blend acrylics together to render objects. And render means we go from light to dark. We include all the light and shadow parts of an object. So we're going to choose our own colors for this today. We're going to build off the skills of creating gradients. Let's start with our supplies. So first thing that we need is a paper or scrap paper so we don't get paint everywhere, and then we're going to be painting on this small sheet of paper here. We'll need a pencil to sketch our stuff. I like to use a Sharpie in order to organize, and you'll see why we use that later. For painting, we're going to grab one of these paint brushes, ideally shaped kind of like this. This is a filbert brush. You can see it's kind of round, but it's not pointy. It has a flat edge to it. Please don't use anything that has a point like this, which is a round brush. Those are not going to help us with making gradients today. Then we're going to use a knife to prep a lot of paint together. Our stencils, if you need one and can't sketch on your own, are going to be these. You can use either the inside of a standard roll of tape. Those are 3-inch cores. If you have a stencil, then also use the 3-inch one, which is the largest one on this. Like usual, I have my paper towel very handy today, and then a cup of water, and my palette paper. Just double check that it's shiny side up. So let's prep our paper first. If it helps, put your name, date, period on the back. We'll paste this onto another sheet of paper later, and it'll look like this. So it's not really that imperative, but if you're leaving stuff to dry, it's good to put your name on it so you don't get confused, because so many will look the same. All right. So let's start out by quickly sketching our template for today. So you're going to take your tape roll or the stencil, not in the center, but in the middle, and then slightly off to the left. We're going to lightly draw in a circle. If you have a ruler or a straight edge, or if you can do it on your own, we're going to divide that to make a table. Determine your light source. We're going to have light coming from the top left like normal, and that's because I'm right-handed. So follow along with that. And we're going to almost paint by numbers this so that it's easier for us to follow along. It's great to pre-plan when you do this. So we're going to start by imagining where our highlight is. When you have a photo, you can see that for yourself. So that'll be our highlight. Then in like a moon shape, kind of wider, this is the actual color of the ball now. Those are going to be our mid-tones, and there'll be several of them. Underneath that, again, in like a moon formation, notice that it's curving with the edge of the ball. That's going to be our core, and notice how like lightly I'm sketching that. And then lastly, we have our reflected light. So those are the 4 parts on the main ball. We have a background, we have a table, and if you recall, underneath the object is what we call the cast shadow. So we have all of these parts. In order for us to get ready, we want to kind of get those colors prepared on our palette paper. So on your palette paper, you can take your Sharpie, and if you want to follow along with me much easier, there are 8 different colors that we're going to end up having on this sheet. And I'm going to use my knife to make them. So if you want to pause the video and follow along and make these the same as me, that will help you stay organized. We have our highlight. Today we're going to use white. Our mid-tone, we're going to mix a lot of it. Shadows, table. Our highlight to our mid-tone, we're going to kind of mix an in-between. Core shadow with our mid-tone plus black, reflected light, mid-tone plus table, and cast shadow, which is our table plus a little bit of black. So let's mix those together now. Let's start out by breaking out our white. We're going to do everything over here, and then we're going to go towards the right. So our highlight, we need just a medium amount of it. Technically, if you see an object, you're almost never going to see a literal bright white shadow, or sorry, a bright white highlight unless it is super shiny. Instead, every object that has highlights, shadows, they're going to be a little bit more transparent than that. But for simplicity's sake today, we'll have our highlight be white. We're going to really dramatize the shadows and lights on this. For our mid-tone, I'm gonna break out the white again actually, just to create a little bit of opacity. My paints are not the most opaque when we use the colors. So I'm gonna put a dot of white for the midtone and white for the table. Okay, we can choose what color we want our spheres to be today. For this, I'm going to go with our magenta. And like I said, I'm going to make a lot of that. So I'm going to put a really good amount. I'm going to mix this, and you can see that I'm using it here, here, here. So I need enough to share with those other colors. So really make sure that you're mixing quite a bit of that. We don't want to have to go back in later. Our shadow is very simply going to be black. Again, we don't need a lot. Black is very strong, so I'm using it here and here. I know this says white, but I'm just gonna grab from there. And then lastly is our table. Our table color, you can decide what you want that to be. For today, I'm going to go with blue. And I don't need a ton of that, but just again, a medium amount. Okay, so next I'm gonna take my knife and I'm going to mix my midtone all together. Remember to take like the tip of your knife and kind of scoot it back. Some people like to use 2 papers. Because I have all this writing, I'm trying to limit myself to stay inside. Notice that I go in swirling motions, and then I'm gonna push it together so it doesn't dry out too much. And I'm going to add that to the piles that I will need it for in the future. So I'm gonna take a little bit of this and try to make a halfway between this pink and this midtone. So I'm gonna put some there. The core shadow is also going to use the midtone. Just imagine this is the ball. This is the base color of the ball. We're going to add some highlights to it to make an in-between there. Core shadow is going to be a darker version of this, so we'll add some shadow. And then our reflected light is also going to have some of our midtone. This is like the smallest area though, so I'm not super concerned about that yet. So I have all of those. To stay organized and stay neat, I'm going to wipe this off, like try to get as much of this off as possible so I don't waste the paint, and put that in my paper towel, just wipe that away. You can also slide your knife on your paper towel like that. Some people I see like crumpling these up. It's fine, it just tends to come loose and then paint is all over. So I like to stay folded, at least to begin with, to keep it organized. All right, so typically in life, you're going to see your highlights aren't necessarily always going to be literal white. So when I say white, I mean my highlight color. Sometimes when the lights are, low, everything kind of has an orange tint to it. So my highlights would be a different color. They're not going to literally be white, and our shadows aren't going to literally be black most of the time. We're doing that for simplicity today, so we just don't have to mix too much. So I have a nice in-between color from here to here now. Again, wipe off. Now my core shadow, I'm gonna take a little bit of black and mix that in. Notice how dramatic that little bit can make that color. You can have intense shadows or you can have kind of more subtle shadows. It's kind of up to you. And then my reflected light and my table, I need to mix first. So mix the table. And I need this color for my reflected light. And I'm going to need some for the cast shadow. So not a ton, but there should be enough of this that I'm going to cover the actual table. So I don't really want to run out of that. Okay, so let's kind of consolidate that so it's one big pile. The more it's spread out, the faster it's drying. So you want to be careful about that. I'm gonna mix these together. Remember that your reflected light is your object. being affected by what is next to it. So the table is next to the midtone or the ball. So we end up with a color that's somewhere in between them. It's kind of like if I take this cup and I put it near my hand, very slightly I can see that affecting my hand. Depends on how bright the lights are. All right, my last color is going to be the cast shadow plus a little bit, the cast shadow, which is the table, plus a little bit of shadow. So a darker version of that. I'm going to take, again, just a little bit of the black and mix that in. We don't want it to be so dramatic. We don't want our shadows to literally be black. So very subtle shadow. It's kind of like the same amount that you would add to the core shadow. You don't want those to be so dramatically different than each other. Okay, now all 8 of our colors are prepped. Now that we have all of our colors prepped and they're not too dry, I'm going to move this aside and we're going to start the painting part of today. So your knife is basically done. Make sure that you clean that off and let's get out our template. I have us working on this piece of paper. For the sake of visibility, I'm going to move this over here so you can see me working on a darker background. I have numbered all of these, so it's really like a paint by numbers. If you'd like to pause and make sure you have the same numbers, then you can. It goes highlight, which is 1, and then this in-between tone, so 5, to the regular mid-tone, to the core shadow, to the reflected light. We're going to start our shadow right here where the ball meets the ground. That's going to be literally black. Then we're going to do the cast shadow. The table is going to cover this whole area, and then our background is whatever color we kind of have left over. You can do white, you can do, I like to do black because we just have so much of it and it's very strong and clean. So let us begin. If you're following along in the video, at this point I would actually have you stop and not try to follow along without knowing what you're doing. We're trying to blend colors kind of like we did here, but this is the hardest thing to do when the surface isn't so broad and so simple. So this is going to be curved. I'm going to lift this up so you can see. I'm going to take my highlight color with my brush, and we want to apply a fairly thick amount of it. And learning how thick we have to apply our paint is one of those skills that we have to learn with practice. So this will take a while. So notice that it's fairly thick. You can see the ridges on there. Now, I'm going to clean off my brush in my paper towel really quickly. Our color is similar enough that I can just go directly into this middle, that 5th color, and I'm going to go around. Again, the paint is on the thicker side, and I'm not really touching the white, but I'm covering that kind of first top part and going around it. Now my brush has a lot of paint on it, maybe a little too much, so I'm going to clean it off, go into my water even, clean that off. And we don't want an extremely dry brush for this. We want it to be just a tiny bit moist, definitely not too wet. And there are multiple ways that you can do this, but what I like to start out with is kind of lightly hold in between the colors right where they meet, and you're going to kind of pat at that and kind of scrub like a wiggling motion. And you can see them starting to mix on my palette or on my paper. So there we have something nice and in between. There's a lot of paint on my brush now. It doesn't look like a lot, but I'm going to wipe that off. If I want to, I can fully clean it. And these kind of bigger areas, I'm gonna like sweep, get some of the paint on there, and again, just go through the edges, kind of scrubbing. If your paint is really thick, then it's going to move around a lot. If it's too thin, it's going to dry before it has time to actually blend. But notice that I'm going in like scrubbing motions very gently and slowly bringing that kind of down. I'm going to reapply some more paint along this edge, and I'm just going to keep doing this with my colors. So right now you finished off the 5th one, and I'm going to go, you can see it covered up here, onto my regular mid-tone. So before I do that, I want to show you that there are several ways that we can make our gradients apply to this. You can have a really smooth gradient if you want to, or you can use a thicker amount of paint. If you recall, that's called impasto, where the paint is very thick. I'll present on Impressionism and how our paint can look like paint. It doesn't have to be so smooth, but while it's still kind of on the wetter side, I will clean off my brush with the water and try to smooth out some of those ridges and some of those areas that maybe look a little too circular. And that's not something you have to do, but I know there are some people who really want this to be as smooth as humanly possible. Again, your brush shouldn't be literally bone dry. It should be a little bit damp and very gentle with your motions. You are going to probably have to go back and forth with your paint. So picking up some paint and lightly brushing that on very patiently. So if this is a skill that takes me a while to show you, I think it's going to take you a while to master. So I basically have a decent command over how much paint I need at any given point. I'm going to keep going and just follow the paint by numbers now. So again, if the paint around the edge is too dry, I'm going to take my paint, just reapply it. That's why we've prepped all those colors. So can you imagine, like, I don't have my colors ready? I'm going to go into my mid-tone now, just straight up. And again, we paint along the edges. It's okay to go over the lines. They're kind of guidelines. They're not so strict. And you can see that even though I wrote in Sharpie, I'm covering up those letters and numbers because I added a little white to make my paint more opaque. Okay. Same thing, I'm gonna wipe off my brush, clean it off as best as I can. If I need to take it to the water, I will. But lightly scrub in between. Get off whatever excess paint. And build that together. If you go too far like I did there, that's why we have our old colors. So over here I went a little far. I'm going to go back into my mid-tone, try to readdress that. And I might even have to go back into my highlight to help it along. Now there are certain mediums that you can use, or products essentially, that you can use to make your paint not dry so quickly. But if you really just master using the paint itself, it'll make using those products unnecessary. Helpful, but like unnecessary. All right, going along, we're now at the core shadow. Notice the kind of ring formation. It starts here and then it's slowly opening up. My core shadow was just that pink color again. We're gonna paint in this kind of moon, so thicker over here, thinner on the edges. This part is getting the least amount of light. Careful not to go all the way into your reflected light. You wanna give that room. And we don't want these like harsh bands. So right now, that color is too obvious of a jump and we have a hard line. Same thing, clean off your brush. And I like to do like a stabbing motion if I can't do those kind of strokes. So stab, stab, stab. And that'll give you a different texture also, but it's totally something you can do. So if you're having a hard time with getting the strokes to look the way you want to, try this stabbing. And notice the way my brush kind of like presses and fans out as I do that. After holding this up, I can see that there's some areas I'd like to go back into while they're still wet. Otherwise, if they're dry, then I would just repaint them. But over here, this line is a little harsh too, so I'm gonna try to soften the transition between here and there, just going back and forth, holding my paper at different angles so that I can see. And there's not a lot of water. I think one of the mistakes I'm seeing people do is using no water, but the opposite of that is diluting it so much that there's just too much water, and that starts to affect the paper. It shouldn't be like watercolor where you have to really watch how much water you're using or else the paper will get destroyed. But if you're noticing anything happening to the paper, you're probably just too liquidy at that point. All right, so reapplying my reflected light color right at the edge so I can, my core shadow color. Right across the edge so that I can move into my reflected light color. Now my table is going to be blue, so we mix the midtone and the table together, and now we're going to have blue kind of purple right around this edge. And we're being kind of dramatic about it, so you can see like a very, very dramatic difference between the shadow and the reflected light. Depending on the lighting, I might add a little black to that, but for today, to simplify, I'm going to just keep it the table plus the midtone. And again, I'm going to blend in between those. Use a tiny bit of water, but notice that I get rid of most of it. I really move my brush along the edge of the cup, and I dab in my paper towel, not bone dry, but not soaking wet. Kind of like thins out those edges. You don't want them to be so thin that they no longer have paint on them and they've turned see-through, but really careful. And notice how I've been holding my brush. So I take advantage of the thin part of it by holding it sideways, and then the flat part of it to blend. So you just have a lot more versatility with this type of brush than you do with a round brush where it's kind of the same all over 360. Okay, so that is the sphere. It is time to move on to the table cast shadow and the darkest shadow. So you can do this in whatever order you'd like to. Doesn't really matter to me. I actually like to start with the larger area, so I'm gonna go and already paint my table. And at this point, if you want to switch to a smaller brush, you can, especially around the edges. So a lot of the times when we paint with acrylic, we end up going further than we intend to when we don't have control yet. So this is the point where I would clean up my edges and make them look nice. I'm going to go a little bit into that cast shadow, make sure it's really wet around those edges, but I'm going to start by carefully going around anything that I want to stay sharp. So notice how I kind of press and outline. And if you need to use a smaller brush to get in those details, then you can. I like to just move my brush around and change the angle of it. So those are the most important parts, or those kind of edge pieces. And then you can bring this down. We can cut off the edge if you'd like to hold onto your piece of paper, so the little one, you don't have to go all the way to the edge, give you something to hold on to, but you can. I'm gonna go in and under, and once you hit those kind of outline parts, then you can go a little bit crazier and looser for the rest. Now typically this plane would have a gradient on it, but we're trying to simplify where we can. Okay, so now I have my table, and I already have the table on there. It's fine if I just immediately mix that into the cast shadow because they're already related colors. I'm gonna cover up here. Just keep in mind that 3 has to go there, and since they're already wet, I can push and twist my brush to get that shadow. Shadows are typically going to be a little bit looser and softer depending on the lighting. The most natural lighting is going to have softer edges, not super hard lined edges. That's when the sun is out. I imagine this ball is not in a sun lit area. But even if I shine like a bright light on it, like directly, that'd be the only way that I'd get a super sharp shadow. You can have them if you would like them, if that is simpler for you. Sometimes shadows are sharp, sometimes they're light, just depends on the strength of the actual light source. Again, I'm going to go over the edge. Sometimes the shadows kind of fade the further away they get from the object. So dipping into there. A little tip I have for you, your paint is going to start affecting your paper towel. Sometimes that's good because you want to pick up more color, but just fold it to a clean spot so you're not getting residual color when you tap it on the paper towel. So if I keep tapping it, there's some areas of like wet pink paint I really don't want to be on this part. So just use a clean part of your paper towel. Some people like to keep their paper towel just a little bit moist. You can also put your palette on a wet paper towel, like underneath it in a pan. For some reason that works to help keep your paints from drying also. I don't have that. I don't need it. All right, this is the part of the ball that is touching the actual ground, so I'm going to use black for there. And again, I'm going to gradient and fade that out. Right now that's very sharp. Clean that out. And see if I can push that back with some of the actual table color. So that's why I have my colors prepped so I can just go back and grab some. So if you aren't mixing enough of your color, notice how much paint I have of everything still left over, then that's going to be a struggle for you. So once you get used to painting and you know that you have enough of something, or you know how big the area that you're going to paint that is, you'll start to understand how much paint you actually need and what's excessive and what's there to like safeguard you in case. You can see me taking advantage of like the ridges on my cup. It's great if you have something like that, but it's not necessary, but helps kind of like scrub. If you don't have that, then just scrub at the bottom. And this edge over here, I want to soften with just a tiny bit of water. Last thing is your background, and for your background, like I said, you can mix up whatever colors you want to here. So I can take all these colors, mash them together, make the background. You just kind of play fast and loose if you do that, because then you can't fix any of your old colors. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to take black. I think it really makes it pop. Same thing, you want to carefully go around your edges. If you miss an area, like over here, you can take a tiny brush to those areas, but for this exercise, it's okay. All right, I press kind of hard and go really slowly around the edge. Again, I switch up the angle of my brush. I'm going to press hard and drag that along. And once you have that, then you can kind of relax through the rest of it. Just smooth out those areas so I don't see any obvious signs of those big kind of thicker tracks. It's not the worst thing, but I want to prove that I can make these smoother areas, but you don't have to, but you can. Again, I go over those more carefully, and this is when I would switch to a smaller brush if I really wanted to be careful. So if you would like to deal with those little areas, then you can switch to a round brush, which is capable of holding a point, or a square brush, also known as a flat. This one's not holding its shape the best, but just to get into those little corners. Okay, so That is how you paint that sphere. We're going to cut this out and we're going to paste it onto another piece of paper with our gradients to prove that we know how to paint. And we are ready to do a larger painting now.